Trump just did something disgusting in his continued efforts to erase black folks from American history. The Department of the Interior announced visitors to America's national parks can no longer enter for free on Martin Luther King Jr. Day or Juneteenth. It's okay. They replaced it with June 14th. Does this date ring any bells? Well, it's President Donald Trump's birthday. The irony was lost on no one. The parks that black soldiers literally built with their own hands would now charge black families on the days meant to honor their freedom and their heroes. This is the story of how America's national parks were created by segregated black regiments, segregated against black visitors for decades, and are now being used to erase black commemoration from the American calendar. It's a story that repeats across more than a century. Black soldiers doing the work, black families being excluded from the result, and black history being systematically removed from national memory. In 2018, only 6% of visitors to national parks identified as black. Black Americans made up just under 7% of the park's permanent full-time workforce. The history of exclusion had created what National Park Ranger Shelton Johnson called a culture of exclusion, one that persists today. Johnson is the only permanent black National Park Ranger serving at Yosemite. He has dedicated his career to bringing the Buffalo Soldier's story to life, educating countless visitors about the contributions of black Americans to park history. He has appeared in Ken Burns's documentary series on national parks. He even convinced Oprah to camp at Yosemite in 2010 to help connect black Americans to their national parks. Johnson often performs interpretive programs while dressed in the traditional Buffalo Soldier cavalry uniform. If Martin Luther King Jr. were alive today, Johnson has said, he would be first and foremost to say we as a people need to go to Yellowstone. We need to go to the Grand Canyon. Because if this is America's best idea, and we played a role in this creation, how dare we not choose that for ourselves? The struggle to make parks inclusive seemed to be making progress. In 2017, President Barack Obama signed a presidential memorandum titled Promoting Diversity and Inclusion in Our National Parks, National Forests, and Other Public Lands and Waters. It called for improving access for all Americans and considering recommendations from diverse populations to protect at-risk historic, cultural, and natural sites. In 2018, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was designated as a free entry day to national parks. It became the first free day of the year, allowing families to honor King's legacy by connecting with nature. In 2024, Juneteenth, the federal holiday commemorating the end of slavery, was added as another free entry day. These felt like small but meaningful steps toward inclusivity. Then came 2025. On January 20th, his first day back in office, President Donald Trump ordered an end to all government diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In March, he signed an executive order titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, targeting the Smithsonian Institution and other cultural bodies for promoting what he called divisive, race-centered ideology. The order claimed that museums had come under the influence of narratives that portray American values as inherently harmful and oppressive. In April, the National Park Service removed content from its website about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. After public backlash, they restored it. Around the same time, pages describing Jackie Robinson's military service were removed from Defense Department websites. The pattern was clear. Any content related to black history was being systematically targeted. In July, Trump issued another executive order regarding national parks. It revoked Obama's 2017 memorandum on promoting diversity and inclusion. It called for increasing entry fees for foreign tourists, while giving American citizens preferential treatment for recreational access. It positioned this as America First policy, protecting access for American families. But the next move revealed what America First actually meant. In November 2025, the Department of the Interior quietly announced new, resident-only patriotic fee-free days for 2026. The announcement came 2 days before Thanksgiving, buried in broader updates about park modernization and pricing. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was removed from the free entry calendar. Juneteenth was removed. Also removed, the anniversary of the Great American Outdoors Act and National Public Lands Day. Added to the calendar, President Donald Trump's birthday on June 14th, which happens to also be Flag Day. Also added, President's Day, the 4th of July weekend, Constitution Day, Theodore Roosevelt's birthday, and the 110th birthday of the National Park Service. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum released a statement. President Trump's leadership always puts American families first. These policies ensure that U.S. taxpayers, who already support the national park system, continue to enjoy affordable access, while international visitors contribute their fair share. The message was clear. Commemorating the end of slavery was not patriotic. Honoring the civil rights leader who fought for equality was not patriotic. But celebrating a sitting president's birthday was. Tyahee Moore, executive director of Soul Track Outdoors, a non-profit that connects urban communities of color to the outdoors, told reporters, "This policy shift is deeply concerning. Removing free entry days on MLK Day and Juneteenth sends a troubling message about who our national parks are for. These holidays hold profound cultural and historical significance for Black communities, and eliminating them as access points feels like a direct targeting of the very groups who already face systemic barriers to the outdoors. The barriers are real. Black families remain underrepresented in outdoor recreation for reasons rooted in this very history. Many experts believe the historic and present-day effects of racism and segregation and the psychological scars of racial mistreatment in public land settings are why so few Black families visit parks today. Many Black people don't feel safe or welcome in national parks. Many lack equitable access to transportation or the time and money needed to enjoy these spaces. And now, the 2 federal holidays specifically meant to honor Black freedom and Black leadership have been stripped from the park calendar. The same parks that Buffalo Soldiers built. The same parks that excluded Black visitors for generations. The same parks that are trying, however imperfectly, to reckon with that history of exclusion. Mary Frances Berry, professor of American social thought and history at the University of Pennsylvania, summed it up. The removal of MLK Day and Juneteenth from fee-free days just helps to accelerate the trend toward reducing information about our nation's struggle toward liberty and justice for all. And all this as we prepare to celebrate the Declaration of Independence. The timeline is complete now. In 1899, Black soldiers built the parks. In the 1930s and 1940s, Black families were told those parks had no facilities for them. In 2025, Black holidays were removed from the calendar of days those parks could be visited for free. The erasure is not subtle. It's systematic. Let's take a step back and understand the history. Summer, 1899. Approximately 500 soldiers from the 24th Infantry and 9th Cavalry departed from the Presidio in San Francisco. They rode around the bridgeless Golden Gate, through California's Central Valley, and up into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Their destination was Yosemite, a prized assignment that soldiers within the ranks called the Cavalryman's Paradise. These men were Buffalo Soldiers, members of the segregated Black regiments formed after the Civil War, and they were about to become America's first park rangers. Before the National Park Service existed, before the iconic ranger hat and badge became symbols of American conservation, there were just soldiers protecting vast wilderness from poachers, timber thieves, and arsonists. The U.S. Army administered Yosemite and Sequoia from 1891 to 1913. Congress had created these national parks, but provided no budget to protect them. Farmers and shepherds ran roughshod over the land, knowing the trails into the sequoia groves long before anyone else. They grazed their sheep illegally, damaged natural resources, and stripped timber from protected forests. The solution was to deploy the Buffalo Soldiers. Captain Charles Young commanded Troop 1 of the 9th Cavalry. At the time, he was the highest-ranking Black officer in the United States Army. The same Charles Young, who would later be medically retired in a racist scheme to prevent him from becoming the Army's first black general. But in the summer of 1899, Young led his men into Yosemite, and he was moved by what he found. He wrote that the Sierra Nevada would convince even the least thoughtful man of the needfulness of preserving these mountains. Young wasn't just a military commander. He was a lover of ecology who made suggestions to the Department of Interior on how to preserve native plants and prevent hillside erosion. Under his watch, not a single poaching incident occurred. He initiated negotiations with private landowners surrounding the park to sell their land to the government, expanding protected territory for future visitors. In 1903, when President Theodore Roosevelt traveled to San Francisco to visit Yosemite, the 9th Cavalry served as his official escort, a historic honor for Young and his men. By 1903, Young was named acting superintendent of Sequoia National Park, the first black American to hold such a title. That same summer, his men completed more work projects than all previous years of military administration combined. The infrastructure they built still exists today. The Buffalo Soldiers constructed the first usable wagon road into the giant forest of Sequoia National Park, where some of the oldest and largest trees on the planet grow. That road eventually became the General's Highway. They cut a trail to the summit of Mount Whitney, at 14,505 feet, the tallest peak in the contiguous United States. In Yosemite, they created an arboretum along the South Fork of the Merced River, widely considered the first marked nature trail and museum in any national park. These men built America's park system with their own hands. They blazed trails, constructed roads, created maps, extinguished fires, monitored tourists, evicted illegal grazers, and kept poachers and loggers away from protected lands. They did all of this while facing the same racism they encountered everywhere else in America. The irony was brutal. These soldiers protected natural beauty in a country that did not embrace them. They worked to preserve lands for all Americans at a time when most Americans didn't consider them fully human. They faced harassment and attacks even while wearing their military uniforms. The diplomatic skill required to remain professional in the face of constant oppression was extraordinary. After Young died in 1922 while serving in Nigeria, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full honors. Years earlier, during his time at Sequoia, locals had wanted to name a giant sequoia after him. Young, in an act of characteristic humility, insisted they wait 20 years to see if they were still interested. They waited. In 2004, nearly 100 years later, the Colonel Charles Young tree was dedicated. Having stood tall and resilient for thousands of years, the tree became a symbol of his enduring legacy. Except America has a way of forgetting the contributions of black people, even when those contributions are literally carved into the landscape. By the 1930s and 1940s, as the modern state and national park system expanded, a new problem emerged. The New Deal programs built approximately 800 state parks across America using federal funding and civilian conservation corps labor. These were beautiful spaces, places where people could retreat, relax, and enjoy outdoor activities, places that should have belonged to all Americans. But black Americans were barred from most of them. The National Park Service, created in 1916 under President Woodrow Wilson's administration, adopted the same racial policies as the rest of the Wilson government. Wilson had ordered the federal workforce racially segregated in 1913, starting with the Post Office and Treasury Department. The National Park Service followed suit, abiding by local Jim Crow laws on racial segregation. That meant black nature enthusiasts were prohibited from national parks in most of the former Confederate South. In 1922, National Park Service superintendents decided on an official policy. We cannot openly discriminate against black Americans, but they should be told that the parks have no facilities for taking care of them. This was the language of bureaucratic exclusion, official indifference designed to keep black families away without explicitly violating federal law. By the 1930s and 1940s, the situation became codified. Through a gentleman's agreement, The National Park Service committed to operate parks according to state laws and customs, including segregation. In Virginia's Shenandoah National Park, that meant segregated dining rooms, picnic grounds, and restrooms. Maps and signs directed black visitors away from white areas to designated Negro sections of the park. At Shenandoah, a separate area called Lewis Mountain Campground was constructed specifically for black visitors. It was built with the same materials and design as the rest of the park by the Civilian Conservation Corps, which gave park leadership the ability to claim they were upholding the separate but equal standard. Lewis Mountain actually became popular among black families. Notable figures like Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who would become the first black general in the Air Force, camped there with his family. Chester A. Franklin, publisher of the Kansas City Call newspaper, was a regular visitor. The campground became known as a hopping joint in the 1940s and 1950s, but Lewis Mountain was an exception. In most places, the separate was never equal. During the New Deal era, Southern states added 150 state parks and excluded black Americans from nearly every one. Where black-only parks did exist, they were vastly inferior in size and quality, often located in remote, inaccessible areas on land that formerly served as dumping grounds. By 1952, black Americans had access to just 12 of the 180 state parks across 9 southern states. Geographic and historian William O'Brien documented that black Americans would need to travel considerable distances to find a park that would welcome them, and many would need to leave their states entirely to find access. White families typically could find a park within 50 miles of home. This wasn't just about recreation. This was about dignity, about whether black families, including black veterans returning from World War II, black soldiers who had liberated Europe from fascism, could take their children to see the giant sequoias that their grandfathers had helped protect, whether they could camp in Yosemite, where Buffalo Soldiers had served as the first rangers, whether they could hike Mount Whitney, where black soldiers had cut the first trail. The answer was no, or at least not without humiliation. Interior Secretary Harold Ickes, who had been associated with the Chicago branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People before joining Roosevelt's cabinet, wanted to end segregation in national parks. He was the man who allowed Marian Anderson to perform at the Lincoln Memorial in 1939 after the Daughters of the American Revolution refused her access to Constitution Hall. He believed in winning real justice and opportunity for black Americans at long last. But even Ickes couldn't overcome the political power of Southern congressmen who held disproportionate influence in the 1930s. The compromise was cruel: provide some segregated facilities for black visitors and claim progress. National Park Service Director Arno Camara implemented a policy that facilities would only be built based on demonstrated demand from black visitors. Since black families were actively discouraged from visiting and told the parks had no facilities for them, the demand appeared low, and so most planned black facilities were never built. The official policy of park segregation didn't end until 1945, when Harold Ickes outlawed it. But local segregation remained in practice in most southern states for decades. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 finally forced integration of public facilities, including parks. But by then, generations of black families had been excluded from these spaces. The psychological damage was done. By the 21st century, the numbers told the story. It's deliberate, and it fits a pattern that black Americans have seen for more than a century. The Buffalo Soldiers who protected Yosemite and Sequoia, who built roads and trails that Americans still use today, were written out of park history for decades. It took researchers like Ward Eldridge and rangers like Shelton Johnson to recover that history from archives and oral traditions. It took President Barack Obama's 20 designation of Charles Young's home as a national monument to finally give these soldiers the recognition they deserved. And now, less than 15 years later, their story is being erased again. Not from the archives this time, but from the calendar, from the symbolic gestures that tell black families they belong in these spaces. The Department of the Interior calls the new calendar Patriotic Fee-Free Days, as if Martin Luther King Jr.'s fight for voting rights wasn't patriotic, as if Juneteenth, the day Union soldiers finally brought news of emancipation to the last enslaved people in Texas, wasn't patriotic, as if the Buffalo Soldiers who served their country and built its parks weren't patriots. The message is that black history is divisive, that honoring black freedom is political, that commemorating black contributions to America is somehow un-American. Captain Charles Young understood what he was up against. He knew that to succeed in the army, he had to maintain impossibly high standards. He had to be better than any white officer just to gain some measure of acceptance. He walked the color line every day of his military career, navigating a system designed to exclude him while trying to serve his country with honor. And still, they denied him his generalship. Still, they forced him into medical retirement based on a fabricated diagnosis. Still, they tried to erase him from history. The giant Sequoia named in his honor stands in Sequoia National Park today. It has stood for thousands of years. It will stand for thousands more. Young insisted they wait 20 years before naming it after him. He wanted to make sure he'd earned the honor, that people still remembered his work. They did remember. In 2004, they dedicated the Colonel Charles Young Tree. In 2021, the U.S. Army finally promoted Young to the rank of Brigadier General, 99 years after his death. But in 2025, the Trump administration removed the day honoring Martin Luther King Jr. from the park calendar. A calendar for parks that Young and his men built. Parks that excluded black families for decades. Parks that are supposed to belong to all Americans. This is the story America keeps telling about black contributions. Build it. Use it. Erase the builders. Exclude the descendants. Remove the commemoration. The Buffalo Soldiers built these parks believing they were preserving something for future generations. They believed in America's promise even when America refused to keep its promises to them. They did the work anyway. And now, more than a century later, black families are being told, again, that they don't fully belong. Not through explicit segregation this time, not through no facilities for them policies, but through the quiet removal of their holidays from the calendar. Through the replacement of days honoring black freedom with a sitting president's birthday. The giant sequoias still stand in the groves the Buffalo Soldiers protected. The trails they cut still wind up Mount Whitney. The roads they built still carry visitors through Yosemite. Their work is permanent, carved into the landscape, but their commemoration is fragile. It can be removed with a memo. It can be replaced with a birthday party. It can be erased as if it never mattered. That's the lesson of America's national parks and black history. The contributions are undeniable. The erasure is inevitable, and the fight to be remembered is never-ending.